And we are live. Welcome, everyone, to the Connected for Real podcast. I'm Rebbetzin, Bat-Chen, Grossman. And today with me, we have a guest. Kate is here, and she's going to tell you all about what she is doing, what she did before, and how she shifted her career, her identity, and how that affected her marriage. So, we're going to be talking about a lot of very fun things. Kate, introduce yourself. Tell everyone why you're so cool.
Absolutely. I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me. My name is Kate Kayaian, and I am a former professional cellist and now a career and mindset coach for creatives of all kinds. And I write a blog, Tales from the Lane, which has stories and advice about everything from time management to overcoming or dealing rather with imposter syndrome and coach one-on-one, and I run the group program, the Creatives Leadership Academy. So that's what I do.
Ooh, so let's talk about this shift because that's what we're here to talk about. There is a career shift that sort of like shook up your marriage in a gentle way. What were you before? How did it look like in your life? And then what happened when you started to shift away from that?
Yeah. Well, when I first met my husband, he was living in Bermuda at the time, and I was living in Boston. I was a professional cellist. I was, doing the thing, playing on Grammy award winning recordings, and just 24/7 being a professional musician. And continued that when I got married and moved to Bermuda, and actually did it on a larger scale because that's when I started touring around the country and playing more concertos, solos. I was sort of more in the spotlight. Um, and he really loved that. We didn't like being apart when I traveled, but he was so proud of me. He loved seeing me in the spotlight and on stage and getting to go to the fun parties afterwards. And he would get to travel with me sometimes. And after the pandemic, well, during the pandemic, I transitioned to doing work online. So I created the first full scale summer music festival that was all virtual, the virtual summer cello festival. So I did that. And then I transitioned that into my cello teaching studio, which was 100% online for advanced student cellists. And then that transitioned to my coaching, and my blog became less, the lifestyle blog about living in Bermuda that I thought it would be, and turned more into this coaching blog and getting more and more followers and attention. And I loved it. The the feeling I got when a client would have a big aha moment or a big win or create this program that was helping so many other people was so much better than being on stage after the most amazing performance. And I was like, what am I doing? I don't want to go back to that. Like, I couldn't see a reason to go back to it. Nothing was pulling me back to performing once the world reopened. And I made the decision. I said, I think I don't want to perform anymore. And that's a big deal in the classical music world. You don't
Right.
quit. You don't ever quit. You do it. You die on stage of a heart attack, right? Playing your last concerto. Um, and as of this year, I quit teaching. So I'm doing it full time now. So there's less traveling, there's less glamour. and and honestly, my husband and I have a fantastic relationship, and we are so supportive of one another. And it was funny because as I started doing this work, I'd have like, "Oh, I got a new client today and I'm really excited to work with them." And he'd be like, "Oh, that's good." Anyway, and he kept changing the subject anytime I talked about anything that I was doing in this new identity. Because I tell you, I'm sure it's like this in a lot of industries, but as a classical musician, we start when we are between 3 and 5 years old. And it's so intensive, the training, you're practicing every single day of your life. Every decision you make is about how it will affect your work as a musician. Every summer I was off at music camps, and I went to conservatory, went to the New England Conservatory of Music. it really is all encompassing. So it is your entire identity. It was like I was a cellist first, I was Armenian second, and wherever I was living at the time came third. But and I was shocked at how difficult that shift was for him because it seemed relatively easy for me. I was like, great,
Right.
okay, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to do this other thing. And he was
Right,
like,
because also you were tasting it. It felt nice to be home, to not have to travel, to have this freedom to just be, who you are and help people.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
he wasn't tasting that. He was just seeing it from the side, being like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And like you said, it's your entire identity.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And I couldn't understand at first why he was having such a difficult time with it when I was not. I was like, "No, come on, this is gonna be great. I'm home and, income is much steadier and we have more freedom," right? Because even our vacations and our decisions as a couple were kind of like bound by my duties and contracts for performing. And even if we both had a week off, if I had a big concert the next week, I'm like, I can't go away that week, right? So we have so much more freedom. And it created a really great opportunity for us to figure that out as a couple because it was hurtful. I felt betrayed. I felt like you're my person, like you're my partner, and I need you to be supportive of this. And he wasn't against it. He was never against it. He just wasn't celebrating it with me the way I needed him to. And so we had to figure that out. And um, it's been really great coming to the other side of it.
Yeah, I feel like it's like this undercurrent, sometimes when you just don't know how to deal with something, you don't know how to process it. There's emotions that come up for you as a husband or
Hmm.
as a partner, the supporter. And it's like, I don't know, I'm not really loving this. I'm not, I'm like, I'll be smiley and, sweet and all. I'm not going to like get in the way, but I'm also not supporting this 100%. Like, I see this going the wrong way. I'm not sure where we're going with this. So
Right.
you have this like undercurrent of like negativity or like questioning, doubt, and that really gets to you because if you're not communicating, that's the worst form of communication.
Yeah.
You're like, you read right into it. Your brain, the first thing it does is like, he doesn't love me. He doesn't support me. Something's wrong. He must
Totally.
be, whatever. Like, what your brain will just fly to the most intense places because there is no communication. So how
Mhm.
did you deal with it? How did you bring it up from undercurrent to actually like, let's talk?
You know, we were at a party one night and I sort of, we were talking to different people and I had my back to him and I heard somebody that he had just met say, "Oh, and what does your wife do?" And he kind of hesitated and stumbled and somebody next to him in the conversation said, "Oh, Kate's a cellist. She's amazing. She's won Grammys." Like, she travels all over the world. You've got to hear her play. And I turned around and I looked at him and he just looked so sad.
Oh,
And I realized that he didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to describe me anymore to people. And I realized that I hadn't given him the language to describe me, to explain what I did. And also that he took such pride in those things that I did. It was exciting and I hadn't yet done anything that was like that impressive. And so I realized in that moment that it had absolutely nothing to do with whether he still loved me or whether he still wanted to be with me. Because honestly, that's how it felt. I was like, are you only married to me because you thought it was cool that I was a cellist? Like,
right.
is this
See,
some weird thing? Like, you just like, ooh, I'm married, my wife's a cellist. That's really cool. And if she's not going to be a cellist, like if you marry a movie star and he's like, I think now I want to be a bricklayer. Like, okay, great. What about those parties at Steven Spielberg's house? It wasn't quite at that level, unfortunately, but Yeah, so in that moment, I realized because
Yep. Yeah.
he had been saying such lovely things about me before this person asked what it was I did. So it was clear, I'm like, he loves me so much. It's just that he's having a tough time with my identity shift. He's having a
Right.
tough time explaining to people who I am now because he doesn't quite get it. And
Exactly.
also, I realized that he needed to grieve his wife, the cellist, who was no longer in the picture. So that's what I tell people who are going through this. Step 1 is understanding what it is about and what it is not about. It is generally, unless there's a bigger problem at play, it is generally not about whether they still love you or still want to be with you or still want to support you. And it's much more about the stories that they've told themselves about who they are next to you and your identity and how it affects them. And
Right.
step 2 is that you have to give them the space and the time to grieve that person because they are essentially no longer in the relationship with that person.
Yeah, one of the things, like, being able to tell your friends, "Oh, my wife is on this big tour now. That's why she's not home," is so fun, It sounds like so exciting. It makes you special because your wife is someone cool. And then suddenly it's like, "Oh, she's home on the
Writing a
computer."
book.
Doing right, like, I have no idea, like, my husband would tell his friends, like, "I have no idea what my wife does," like, he just says it straight out. I think she became one of those podcast ladies, you know? He has no clue what I do for years, like, finally when his students were all over for, a big dinner, I sat them all down and I taught them the calm method, which is, like, the method I came up with, and I work them through it and, like, step by step. And really, I'm like, every single one of you guys has to know this because it will change your life.
Yeah.
And, you know, I came up with it as 4 steps in order to create flow. And you guys all want that. So they were all into it. They said, afterwards, they were like giving feedback. It's so intuitive. I love it. It's so easy to, implement, whatever. And my husband turns around to me and says, "That's what you do?" I'm
I
like,
love it. I
that is
love
what I
it. Yeah. I mean,
do.
yes, darling, that is what I do.
Exactly. So it's just, he was listening like all the other guys for the first time to what I'm teaching, and
Mhm,
he's never heard it before. And it was
mhm.
just, it dawned on me that, yeah, like, when did he have a chance to, like, sit there and go deep with my stuff? Like, he's not
Right.
showing up for my Zooms, right?
Right, and also I think it's, you know, being a graphic designer, you say, "Oh, my wife was a graphic designer." Everybody knows what that is, right? So we can imagine you going to your and maybe if we're imagining it wrong, we can immediately come up with a picture of you going into a big office and doing graphic design, and when you say, "Oh, my wife's a cellist," people although honestly, my husband had to Google cello when he met me, that's how not into classical music he was. Um, maybe he's, like, sitting there feeling like, "I went through all this effort to learn this, and now" but people say, "Oh, she's a cellist." People generally know what that is. If you say, "Oh, my wife's a lawyer," people know what that is. People say, "Oh, she's a writer and a coach." They're like, what does she do? Like, who does she work with? What is" it's more complicated and people aren't as able to just sort of immediately understand it. Um, so and that's where, giving him the information and the vocabulary and the language to understand exactly what it is I do was really helpful. Um,
Yeah, that's such good advice. Like, take your time, sit down and really, just communicate. Because the fact that
yeah,
he wasn't communicating to you what he was feeling was just because he didn't have the words that you were communicating to him. There was just this, like, assumption that, oh, it's fine, like, you'll figure it out. Or my husband knows what I do. I do it all the time,
do it all day long. Yeah.
do it all day long. He should know. It was very interesting to see the disconnect, and
Yeah.
how it was just like an eye opener of, like, "Oh, that's what you do?"
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think there were a lot of memories at play too. So once we part of the grieving process grieving, in this case didn't mean like tears and and the traditional kind of grieving, but more talking about it like, "Oh, what was your favorite recital tour that you came along on? Like what was your favorite memory of being on the road with me?" Or um and one memory that came up, he said, "Well, I remember when I first met you and I was telling my family about you. I that's what you were." So like that's the memory of first falling in love with me of like, "Oh, she's a cellist. She lives in Boston. She's American." Sorry. He's English. All of that stuff that was and I had to say like, "Well, that's all still true. Like I was a cellist and that's still part of me." And once we could talk openly about it, like it wasn't like, no, it wasn't a matter of like, I hate the cello and I don't want to talk about it anymore, which was sort of how he felt like, oh, she's not a cellist anymore. So we have to pack that up and put it away. It's not like that. It's bigger
Right.
than that. We can
Do you still play for fun or just like take it out sometimes?
I do. I live on the island of Bermuda, which is 21 square miles with 60,000 people on it. And so there aren't a lot of cellists. And I run the Bermuda Philharmonic. So I am still involved with the art scene and the music scene there. And so I'll occasionally play a fundraiser here and there. But yeah,
Yeah,
I
but it's like, it's such a shift because you no longer are like attached to it, and
Mhm.
therefore he doesn't know what to attach you to. There's
Right.
like a missing piece.
Exactly, exactly. It was funny, somebody, a contractor in Boston, who runs this chamber series, he emailed me and asked me, like, I don't know them very well, and he asked me if I could do this upcoming concert. And I was just like, "Whoa, you didn't get the memo." Yeah. Thank you, no. Um,
It took me 2.5 years to finally feel like I educated all of my clients that I no longer do graphic design. Okay,
right.
just for all of you who haven't been following for a while, I was a graphic designer for 15 years, and then I had this like new pull, like God was just calling me to do this thing. And I was like kicking and screaming. I was resisting it a lot because I was, like you said, I had made my identity around being a graphic designer. And I was so
Mhm.
happy and so proud of myself for all the things I accomplished, like working on Fifth Avenue and working with these big clients and blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. And then it's like, what? I have to leave this, And I was like talking to God a lot, being like, what do you want me to do instead? What is this?
Right. It's a strong pull, isn't it? Like,
Oh, yeah. You
I
can't
felt that as well of, no, this is what I was meant to do. This is my purpose. And everything I'm sure you find that, I mean, everything you put out looks great, right? So it all has that graphic design background influence.
for
And
sure.
I could not do what I do if I hadn't been a cellist. So it will
Exactly.
always be a part of me. But it has taken about 6 to 9 months before it didn't feel weird to not say I was a cellist.
Oh, yeah,
When people ask me what I do, at first it felt like a lie, like, "I'm a writer." Like, "You're supposed to say you're a cellist," right? This little voice in my head. Um, yeah, I'm a writer, I'm a coach. Yeah.
I found it was really hard for my parents because to them, they were so proud of their little girl and who she's become, and oh my gosh,
Mhm.
15 years, graphic designer or whatever, and then I turn around and I'm like, "Okay, pregnant with number 6 and having this great pull that's, like, taking me to this new thing," and they're like, "No, no, no, you're still a graphic designer, like, we're
You
not
can
letting
still be
go of this."
passionate.
Yeah, it was really hard. It's like, "This you could do that on the side, but you're still a graphic designer." I'm like, "No, no, I'm not even doing graphic design on the side anymore. I'm, like, done." And they're like, "No," So for me,
Yeah.
it was, like, really interesting to see it as, like, a mother a parent's daughter thing. Like, my
Yes,
parents really
absolutely. Yeah,
had a hard time.
yeah, yeah. My mom didn't really say anything about it at all. She was like,
Cool.
"Okay." Like, "Huh, okay." Like, "Alright."
Alright.
Uh,
Something you brought up was really interesting is, like, when you started talking to your husband about what was your favorite memory and what things did you like? I think that the things that came up also gave a lot of clarity about what were the things he thought he was losing that really in
Mhm.
reality maybe he wasn't. So tell me a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and that's sort of my step 3 in this process is finding the commonalities of, "Oh, I just loved seeing you on stage, sort of the center of attention, I was always so proud of you." And I said, "Well, I have those moments now." And I think, you know, it's not really my story to tell, but he's kind of shy. My husband, he's very outgoing, he's very extroverted, but he's also very shy. So he doesn't love having to give a speech or being the center of attention. And so I think he was kind of living vicariously through me. So like
Mm.
he couldn't do that. He thought it was amazing that I could just get up there and talk to a huge audience of people and feel really comfortable. Um, which of course took a lot of training and experience, but we're not going to get into that. Um, and so I had to that gave me some good clues of in my new role, I was gonna be there, right? I mean, now, for instance, like he's gonna tell everybody about this podcast episode. He always does. Every time I'm on somebody's podcast or if I'm in the paper or a magazine article about me, he is so proud and he loves showing that around, right? It's his version of that. He
Because
loves
that's really great. I think that, sometimes the husbands think that, wait, I fell in love with this like really charismatic, outgoing,
Mhm.
really confident in her skin person. And now she's going to turn into this like, I don't know, like, are you going to like shrink? Are you
Yes,
going to go back into this like,
exactly.
and so it's like, no, I'm not shrinking. If anything, I'm only growing, right? Like I'm going to create a new platform that allows for these truths that I have to teach to come out. And it feels like I'm adding to the world. So in a way, you're not losing that.
Yes, thank you. That was a really beautiful way of stating that. It's exactly right. I think they tie those characteristics and those personality traits that they fell in love with, they tie them to the immediate, facts of like, oh, she's charismatic and outgoing and powerful because she's a cellist.
Exactly. And it's like, if
And
you stop being jealous, you will stop being all those things.
right, exactly. So as a coach, I was giving away my power. I was like helping other people be in the spotlight instead. And I am who I am. So I'm always going to be out there talking to big crowds and people and um, having a wider reach. That's important to me. Um, and so I think, yeah, finding those commonalities of through those conversations and the grieving process and the memories, finding out like what is it that you are afraid of losing, and then showing your partner like how you're not actually losing that. This is how it's just going to manifest differently. And that's just those things are who I am.
Right.
Um,
That's
you know,
that's really
maybe
powerful.
no Grammy parties, but that's okay. That's
Yeah, we
okay.
have different types of parties, don't worry.
There are different types of but coaches have parties too, right? We
Well,
do,
if they
right?
don't, we should make them because
We
they're
should
really
make them. Yes. That would be great. Yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then, once you've found those commonalities and you have gone through the grieving process and there you sense that they're more like, okay, all right, this is going to be cool. This is going to be fine. You've given them the language to explain who you are and what you do so that they feel confident in describing you and talking to others about you and your new identity. um, then you've got to bring them along for the ride. Like to whatever extent you're comfortable, some people work 24/7 with their spouses, and some people, separation of church and state for sure. Like, please do not get into my business. But the more you can share about a win or, something that troubled you that day or what something means, like, oh, I was asked to be featured in this magazine and this is what that means to me, this is what that means to my business and my career, or my client had this enormous win and this is what it means to me. Bring
Right.
them along for the ride, help them feel like they are part of the new identity, Um, because I think there is also an underlying fear that if you fall in love with one person and they change, they have a new identity, that new identity might not want to be married to them.
Right.
Right? Like, cellist Kate loved me and wanted to marry me, but does coach Kate love me and wanna stay married to me? Like, we're always afraid that it's about us. Like, what if they don't love this version of me? And meanwhile, they're worried that the new version of us isn't gonna love them as much. So that
Mm.
communication and reassurance, and bringing them along for the ride, I think can help show that in a really great way.
Yeah, I think, just communication is key. Like we said, if there is no communication, that is communication. That's the worst type of communication because
Right?
then it's like this vacuum that you need to fill and trust your brain. It will do the brain thing and it will just fill it with all the worst stuff because that's what brains do. Right. Worst
Mhm.
case scenario. And it's like, no, 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 we don't want that. So,
Yeah.
how do we make sure that we address it, even just on their level in the beginning, just giving, basic information, what this means, having a little bit of back and forth, listening a lot,
Mhm.
and really picking up on like what is it that is bothering you so much.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. We are very convincing storytellers to ourselves. Like,
Yeah.
whatever story we are making up about a situation, we are so sure that that is what is going on.
And
Um,
once we get one, like once we solidify a story, we're so good at rerunning it. So we're like looping in our head about this thing that isn't
yeah,
even true.
right.
And we won't let it go until something really big confirms that it's not true. So it's
Mhm.
much easier to take, like you said, take them along for the ride. Start from the start. Like,
Mhm.
as soon as things start to pull you, as soon as you feel like there is a shift, communicate that. Be like, wow, I'm going through something. There's a lot of, changes going on, but don't worry. Like I'm really staying grounded. I'm
Right.
not leaving, I'm not making any big, crazy moves. There's something really reassuring about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for both parties, because, you and I were chatting a little bit before, and I mentioned that when I sort of I fell into coaching over the pandemic when I wasn't performing anyway, so that kind of gave me a nice smooth transition. But that doesn't mean to say that I didn't go through any, crisis of the heart, right? Because I had been a cellist for 43 years of my life every single day, and all of a sudden I don't need to practice. Um, and you had told me earlier that when you made your shift, that it was less smooth. You felt like even though you felt this calling and this pull, it was difficult for you to let go of that old
Oh man,
identity.
I was kicking and screaming. I had so much resistance. I was
Mhm.
like, "You set me up for this. You got me, through school." I went to Pratt Institute. I worked on Fifth Avenue. I was like so happy with the way things were going and went and like how I built my own thing that I could be home with the kids and still be out and, meeting with big clients and whatever. And I didn't realize at the time, but like my meetings with the big clients were always about making peace between the families and, giving them that backing of like, just what does God want? Get in touch, make
Mhm.
decisions based on like, alignment. So it was like I was coaching then too. And only it took me a while to realize that I actually didn't change anything. I just
Mhm.
I'm doing different things. But I was so scared of what this means. And also, there was a part of me that was like, "Ugh, I hate coaching. The whole
Mm.
world, everybody is a coach. Oh, I'm gonna just become one of those people and whatever." It's like I had so much resistance around that too. Like, I don't wanna call myself a coach. I'm just gonna call myself an advisor, you know? And I was like, nobody knew what that means. And I was like, okay, fine, I'm a coach. And just leaning into that, realizing, yeah, it's just the words that people know. People can,
Mhm.
at this point, people have been educated enough to know what a coach is. And, because my niche is so specific, because I was a graphic designer and all of my experience was growing a business while being the more successful one, right? So, like, my husband's a
Mhm.
rabbi. He's a lot, studying most of the time. He's answering a lot of questions. He's the go-to, person for sources and things. So he's doing his thing, and I'm really proud of him. But like, I was the one who was considered the most successful one, and I was doing more of like the stuff. And so it's like, how how is that growth, right? And like constantly trying to get bigger and better in business affecting my marriage. And there was a time when I just started screaming at my husband, like, you're holding me back. It's because you're jealous that I'm not growing even more. And, you don't want me to make more money than you or whatever. Like, I threw all this garbage at him because that was a story in my head. And he just
Mhm.
looked at me and said, what? No, I have no idea what you're talking about. If you make more money, I'll be so happy. Like, I don't care. And I was like, you're not jealous? He's like, no, I'm really proud of you. I'm happy for you. Go, 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 do it. And I was like, who are
Oh,
you?
stories I've been
Like,
making up in my head again. Yeah.
exactly. And it's like, so why are you so annoyed when I have to go work at certain hours? Or why are you so negative about blah, blah, blah? Like, he was saying the right things, but evidence was showing me that like he wasn't happy. So he had to really explain what was really bothering him and what wasn't.
Yeah.
And I think that was the breaking point where I was like, you know what? I'm going to show myself that I can succeed, and it doesn't have to come at the price of my marriage. And when I did it, all of my friends from the conferences and from all of the networking events, they were all like, how did you do that? How did you grow your business, succeed, and actually like break through all these limitations without losing yourself, like without losing your marriage, without losing the time with your kids? Like, I was just really able to keep that, quote unquote balance that everybody is looking for, right?
Yeah.
And so I started telling them, and I'm like, oh, I think I have it down to a method. Like, I have steps I could teach you.
Yeah.
And so it just became this thing that fell into place as soon as I was able to let go of the resistance and just lean into it. It just freed itself. And I think the biggest thing for me was this there was this coaching program that was
Mhm.
going to teach me how to become more of a leader and like really lean into my gift. And it cost a ton of money, like the most money I've ever spent on anything in my entire life. And I was petrified, and I turned to my husband and I said to him, like, I'm so scared because signing up for this means I'm committing to becoming a leader. And
Mhm.
he looks at me and says, well, if that's what you're born to do, then that's what you should do. And I thought, who are you? Like, who is this? What's going on? Like, he's saying all the right things.
Mhm.
And obviously, it was God sending me the message that yes, I'm being backed up. I have the support. I need to just do it.
Yeah.
And as soon as I signed up, I didn't actually have to do anything in the course, even though I did. I got a ton out of it. But like, just that stepping into the course, like being willing to commit, I let go of all the stories about who I was and what I'm supposed to do and how this is not okay. And I just leaned into it completely. And that was such a relief.
Yes, I love that. That's so beautiful. I think that sometimes we can use our spouses as a form of resistance.
Oh,
Like
I
Stephen
call it
Pressfield would say, like, "I can't do this because my spouse wouldn't like it. My spouse would be
exactly.
upset if I made more money than they did, so I can't be too successful," right? And then they tell you that they really would love it, and you're like, "Oh, now I have no excuse, now I have to do it." So,
Exactly.
uh, and I find that that's really common to when somebody makes a big commitment, whether it's financially or if it's a move. And I don't really recommend my students like burn the ships, my clients burn the ships to do something. But sometimes emotionally, some form of that is necessary to show yourself that you are committed. You're going to do it. Right. So when
Yeah.
people say, "Oh, I know I really need to do this, but I just don't really have the money to put towards this right now," it's like, I can't really say, well, putting the money towards it is what's going to make it happen for you, because it's going to
Yes,
signal to you that you've committed, that you've made the leap into this world, into
yes,
this
it's so
identity.
powerful. It's so powerful. And I feel it every time I commit to something, and I tell myself, I'm like, this is like the first step is 80% of the work. The
Mhm,
commitment and the actual like stepping into this new thing is usually what gets me so focused and so motivated to just
mhm.
get that done, and do it. So,
Yeah,
uh,
and I think before that commitment can happen to anything, I think what I just want to circle back a second to something important that you said, which was that when you started coaching, you realized that the work you were doing as a graphic designer was so closely aligned to who you are as a coach and a mentor, that you were doing it all along. And when I first started coaching, like really beginning months, and I didn't have any clients yet. I had one, right? And I wanted to get more. I was building my website, and they said, "Well, you need testimonials, right? You need people talking about having worked with you." And I said, "Well, I haven't had clients yet, but I've had so many cello students."
right.
And my coach at the time said, like, just pull anything that somebody talks about working with you and what it was like to work with you. And I went through all of these, like, thank you cards or Christmas cards or whatever they sent me, where they'd write a lovely little note. And I went back to some of my longer term students who wrote me a note when they graduated from high school. And in it, every single one of them had some form of, you created such an open space for me to figure out who I really was as a person and as a cellist, or you were both a teacher and a mentor. You were my cello teacher. You were also my life coach. And, like, they were saying it decades before I made this shift. And I think that as important as it is for us to convey that commonality to our spouses, we have to figure it out for ourselves, that who we were before in our old quote unquote identity is still exactly who we are now. It's just manifesting itself in a different form,
Right. And
right?
I think also you can't shortcut. You can't be like, well, what if I would have become a coach right away and I would have skipped the whole graphic designer? What if I would have like not been a cellist? No, like
Yep.
my whole business is based on all the experience I've had as a graphic designer, and as a
Exactly.
wife and as a mother and as, the way that I found how to live and flow, right? So like
Hmm.
my specialty is marriage when it comes to women in business. 'Cause it's not just marriage, it's this dynamic of how they affect each other and what
Yeah.
happens when you want to do certain things and there is like resistance on the other side, right?
Yeah.
So I could not have done that without everything I've gone through. And you the same, like you cannot coach people to make their events and be who they are and really show up, authentically without
Hmm.
having all of that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. When I talk to a performer about overcoming stage fright, how am I supposed to coach them through that if I had never experienced it myself? Right. And of course,
Exactly.
it's a bigger picture than just getting yourself on stage, which is, where the coaching work comes in. But, the fact that I've lived through all of that stuff, makes me a better writer, a better coach, a better storyteller, because music is just storytelling anyway. So
Yes.
yeah, it's been a beautiful transition, um, not without its little bumps and bruises, nothing nothing scars, no open wounds here. But yeah, it honestly surprised me that there would be a marital dynamic to it.
Right, and
Really
that's another
surprised me.
thing that it's like, we didn't see it coming, so just the shock value takes its own toll, you know?
Mhm.
It's like if you plan ahead and you're like, "Okay, 1 second, I need to communicate, I need to do this, I need to explain what I do." Like, yeah, that would have totally gone a different way, but I didn't think those things through because I didn't expect it to
I didn't
happen.
expect it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Also,
very
sometimes these things
interesting.
happen really organically, right? Sometimes it's
There is
just a
no way
little.
for you to know.
Yeah. You don't just, come home from performing heart surgery and say, "I'm gonna be a ballet dancer today. I've quit my job. I'm now a ballet dancer," right? That's
No,
not really how it works.
yeah,
So
there's
the things Yeah, I think that bearing these things in mind as you go through this process of if these things pop up, yes, it would be great if you can, have a preemptive strike that's better for you, better for everybody. But as you see these things come into your relationship, again, understand what it is and what it is not. Give them time and space to grieve and talk that through and talk about memories. And through those conversations, find out what it is they are afraid of losing. Talk about how that still exists in you, find those commonalities, and then be sure to bring them along for the ride with you so it, strengthens you as a couple. They feel more empowered in what you do.
Yes, I love that. Thank you for getting so practical. It's very helpful for everyone.
Me too. It's what my dyslexic brain needs. Like, just give me 4 clear steps.
Yeah, exactly. How can people find you and, follow up with you?
Oh, thank you. Well, my website is kayaian.com, which is Kayaian and my first name. And can sign up for my weekly newsletter, which is called The Weekend List. And it comes out every Friday morning. And it's just sort of a summation of that week's blog post, which is career and mindset advice and stories. And it's everything from um, productivity tips and planning strategies to more bigger picture things of taking action in your careers. And I'd love for you to join us along on this little ride. Otherwise, if you love a blog, I write the Tales from the Lane blog post. So,
That's awesome.
yeah.
And if you guys are interested in following up with me or knowing anything more about what I do, so first thing, you can get the guide to unravel overwhelm, which is my free guide. And it's really powerful. You can get that at connectedforreal.com/guide. So that's really exciting. And I'll send you that link to send to all of your people on your newsletter. And then, if you email me and we can talk about how to work together. And I do have right now 2 spots left for my one-on-one 3-month mentorship. So that's a really exciting, they're almost filled up. So I'm
Yeah,
very
go
excited
grab
about that.
them. Yeah.
Yeah. Usually I was doing like group things for a long time. So suddenly for me to open up one-on-ones is like a real treat and I'm really enjoying it.
It's the best.
So yeah, thank God. And thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me. What a great discussion. It's an important conversation to be having. So thank
Yeah,
you.
for sure. And thank you everyone for listening. We'll be back next week with more amazing information and interviews.